Hey friends, welcome to our last video in our Watercolor Week series. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to be going through all the fun effects that you can do with watercolor. And I really hope that you guys are feeling more confident with painting with watercolor. It doesn't seem as scary, but there's one thing I do want to say about that. Now, I know I said that you're going to feel so much more confident by the end of this week, but what that doesn't mean is that you're going to be a pro at watercolor painting. It does take more than a week to master watercolor painting. Heck, I've been doing it for 5 years and I am not a master yet by any means. I am still learning every single day. The good news is that now that you've completed this watercolor week, you have the foundations to painting with watercolor, and you're going to be able to attempt new paintings without the fear of not knowing what you're doing. Now, will it turn out perfect the first time? Most likely no. The second time, probably not. The third time, maybe a little closer, but again, probably not. There are times where I have done paintings 10 times and they still don't look the way I want them to, but with each attempt, I learn something new. Heck, even with the tutorials that I put out now, there's times where I've painted these paintings like 5 times and I've gotten frustrated and I ripped it up and I get angry and then I walk away and I come back and I try again. But with each of those attempts where I got really angry, I did learn something. So just keep that in mind, that even the people that it may seem like it's effortless and easy, they have practiced. And in my case, I have practiced 4 years. So if this is your first time painting with watercolor, you're on day 7. Day 7. I'm on year 5. Just keep that in mind. But like I said, you now have the basics and the foundation to painting with watercolor, which is going to make it easier for you to get better. And the good news is if you love it, that's all that matters anyway. So let's jump into our last video, have some fun, and let's get started. Okay friends, we have made it to our last and final video of the week. This one's going to be fun with some other fun effects and techniques that you can do to create texture to your work. Okay, so we've talked about fun effects like the wet on wet technique and color bleeds. Now we're going to talk about 4 others that I like using. Our first one is called blotting or lifting. Now this can give a really fun effect if you are trying to create some cloud shapes by lifting color. So I'm just going to quickly show you. I'm going to grab some blue and I'm just going to apply it to my paper. Let's say I'm doing a sky. Okay. I'm just going to do a small sky here. And what you want to do is you can grab a tissue paper or a paper towel. I'm just going to wash off my brush. I'm just going to grab a quick tissue here. I'm going to roll it up into a ball. And I'm just going to blot some cloud shapes. And what it does is it lifts the pigment off the paper to reveal the paper underneath. So it's still slightly blue, but it's lifted a lot of that pigment off. And I really love using this technique to create clouds. Now this can be used purposefully, like I said, to create clouds or so, but also say you make a mistake, you can fix it by lifting the color. So say I do a leaf here and I'm like, oh, no, I don't like that green, or I don't want it to look like that. If you catch it quickly enough, you can actually lift the color like so with your tissue, get some clean water on your brush, scrub it a bit, just gently, not too hard. Lift again. And you can get most of that color off and fix some mistakes. So say I didn't want it that color, I wanted it red. And I could just paint over and it's like it was never even there. Okay, so you can use this technique to create some clouds and some effects like that. Or you can use it to actually fix mistakes. So the trick with fixing mistakes is making sure you get it once it's wet. Now be aware there are some colors that have a bit more of a staining ability to them, so they will be harder to lift, but the majority of it you can get off. The next thing I'm going to show you with lifting and blotting is creating a bokeh effect. So a bokeh effect is usually in photography when someone takes a photo of a light and has it out of focus. So it's this kind of like blurry circular image in a photograph, but you can actually recreate that in a watercolor painting. And I'm going to show you how to do that by lifting color. So to start, I just painted this background with some blue and now I'm going to let it fully dry. Okay, now that our background is fully dry, I'm going to take a wet brush and clean water, and I'm just going to paint a circle with the clean water, and I'm just going to gently rub it so some of that paint lifts off. And I'm creating this light circular shape that kind of resembles a bokeh effect. Now I'm just going to take my tissue paper and blot it. Okay, I'm going to do another one. And we're just being very gentle. You're not scrubbing too hard, but you're lifting off that paint with your clean water. If you need to wash your brush off and just dab it again on your paper towel, you can, and then you just blot it with your tissue and it lifts off that color. Then you can always wait for that part to dry, and you can do it again and even overlap some of these circles. Doing them at different shapes and sizes, or more so just different sizes, is really cool because it does replicate that bokeh effect that you can get in photography. So I'm just going to wash off my brush just so I get more clean water, because I'm lifting off that pigment with my brush. So instead of just moving it around, I'm trying to rinse it off, and I go back in with a clean brush. Again, grab my tissue and blot it. Okay, and then if you do enough of these circles, they almost kind of look like bubbles or that bokeh light effect. So those are different ways that you can use blotting and lifting in your work. You can fix mistakes, but you can also create some really cool effects. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is dry brush. Now, this can be used intentionally. There's sometimes when we're figuring out watercolor, how much water we need on our brush to paint with, we can get this dry brush effect that we might be like, this is not what I want. I don't want this. But you can actually use it intentionally so it gives your paintings a bit more texture. So in order to do this, have your brush nice and damp, and you can just go into one of your paints, very minimal water, like so. And you just have this dry brush. You don't have a lot of water on your brush, but see, this almost looks kind of like a water pattern. I should have done it with blue. Okay, you can just go back and forth like that, and it just looks like a really cool texture. You can add it or overlap it on some maybe clothing if you're doing an illustration, and it just gives it that little bit of texture that can really make your painting pop. So for an example, I'm just going to create a really light wash of this pink. I'm going to let it completely dry, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of texture over top, and it just makes it look really interesting. So let this completely dry. And now I'm going to go back in just to the paint. My paintbrush is damp. It's not wet. There's no drips on it. So it's wet enough that it will pick up some paint from like a dry-ish pan. But you don't want it wet where it's going to be smooth going on your paper. Okay, and it just can give some really cool textures. This would actually be really awesome for water. Just getting those little dark bits to leave the lighter part as highlights in like an ocean or a lake scene. That would be really cool. Another way to use this technique is you can create a really cool grass texture with the dry brush effect. Now for this, I'm actually going to, my brush is damp, so it's been in the water, but there's no water droplets on it. You can just dry your brush like that. You can fan out your brush tip like this. See that? Just with your fingers, and you can go into some green, and you're just going to dab around, and you can just do some dry grass effects. Okay, so you had a damp brush, you fan that out, and you just dab it like so into your paint. So your paint doesn't have a lot of water in it. It's been wet, but it's not, does not have a puddle. Because if you do go in it and it does have a puddle of water, you're going to soak up that water in your brush, and you're not going to have the dry brush effect. So make sure it's just damp. You could always bring a little bit over to one of your mixing wells like this, and you're going to break up those bristles and just do some dry brush grass techniques. Now, a concern may be, am I going to ruin my brush? Not at all. All you have to do is make sure that you're being fairly gentle with it. You don't want to be stabbing it like crazy. And when you're done, you're going to rinse off all the color, and then roll it kind of on your paper towel like so, and just reshape the bristles back to your nice point, and your brush will be just fine. So that is how you do the dry brush technique. Okay, our next technique is going to be salt. Now this is something you might have tried before in maybe elementary school. I know I've tried this with my students back when I was teaching. It can be a really cool effect if you're doing maybe a galaxy or a starry night background. I'm just going to grab some of this Viridian. You know what? Maybe I'll grab some black. I don't know. Let's just have fun. But yeah, you could use this for a galaxy if you wanted to. Just a cool textured background. And you're going to make sure it's still wet. I don't know why I put those two colors together. Then you're going to take some salt. I have some salt in a little cup here. Just a little bit, and you're just going to sprinkle it onto that wet paint. And it will only work if the paint is wet. Then you're going to let it completely dry. We're going to come right back to that once it's dry. And while we're doing that, we're going to do our last technique here. And then you guys can kind of watch how it forms this really cool effect over time as it's drying. Okay. And our last technique here is called dropping water. Now this is funny because this is something that usually happens by accident that we don't necessarily want to happen, but you can use it intentionally in your work. Okay, so remember a couple of videos back when I was talking a little bit about water control, and I was saying how if you drop little water droplets into your painting, it's going to repel the paint and push it away and create those watercolor blooms. If we look back to this painting, these are the kind of blooms I'm talking about, where you have this really cool texture, but here we didn't necessarily do it intentionally. This was mostly because the paper was a little bit more difficult to work on. Here with these flowers, you can see these blooms again, and this happens because you have more water in those areas, and it repels the paint to the edges to create these blooms. Now, sometimes we don't want this to happen, but in our work, we can use this intentionally to make it look really cool and give it some really fun textures. An example of this is using it to create some fun waves in your water, just some subtle waves. So I'm just gonna create another blue background here. Bring it down just a bit. Okay, so here we have our ocean. Looks very nice and flat. But maybe we want some crashing waves at the front. So I'm gonna wash off my brush. I'm gonna make sure I have some clean water on my brush, and I'm just gonna take a little, not a lot, and I'm just gonna add some of that clean water to where I want there to be some crashing waves, okay? You might even wanna let your paint on your paper dry just a tad bit first before you add the water. If it's too wet, it might match the wetness that you're laying down. So you can let it dry for a minute, maybe even less, and then grab your little bits of clean water and you're just going to drop it in there. And you're going to see it's kind of white where I've put that water, and it gives this really cool effect, like they're kind of like crashing waves. I've even seen people do this intentionally in their florals, in their stems or their flowers. So sometimes we try and avoid this from happening with our flowers and our leaves and all that stuff. But I've seen artists actually finish it off by dropping in some water just to create extra texture. It gives it something interesting to look at. So while you might not necessarily enjoy the look of this, some people actually do this on purpose and they love the way it looks. I think sometimes when I'm doing some abstract florals, I really enjoy that look, so I might give it a try as well. But as you see here, as it's starting to dry a little bit, you're going to do a bit more, you're getting these white areas that are repelling the paint, and it kind of looks like they're waves in the ocean. So that is our dropping water technique. Now, if you do this by accident and this is not something that you really wanted to happen, you can always fix it by just taking your wet brush, going over the whole thing again, making it all one color, and then trying again to fix whatever mistake you feel like you made. But using this intentionally in your work can really be a lot of fun. Okay, and then lastly, going back to our salt, we're just gonna wipe off that salt there. And look at that really cool pattern underneath. It's really cool if you want to add it to like a snowy background so it looks like snowflakes, or like I said, a galaxy or stars. It's a lot of fun to add to your work. So there are my 4 extra fun effects that you can do with watercolor. Another one that I don't have with me, if you use rubbing alcohol, you can do it the same as you do with the dropping water, but it makes it even whiter and more intense. So that's something you could also try. I really hope you guys enjoyed this series with me. It was so much fun painting with you. I do have so much more to teach and tons more videos on my channel. I am going to list below a bunch more videos for you to check out, especially beginner paintings for you to try using all the techniques that we learned this week. And lastly, I just want to say one more time that my book, Watercolor Lessons, is out now in select countries. It is a great reference to have. Everything that I taught this week is in here, plus more. Everything from supply guides to our techniques that we used, then 20 tutorials at the end, which are a lot of fun to do, and they include the techniques that are used, so you know exactly everything that we learned this week is in here, what you'll need to know for the project ahead. And then at the back of the book, we have some tracing pages, so if you don't know how to draw them, you could always trace them, get some tracing paper and transfer it and do it yourself, and it's just a lot of fun. So I definitely suggest you check that out. Thank you again so much for joining me, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video in this series. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a ton. If you ever have any questions, feel free to follow me on Instagram and message me over there. I answer basically every message that I get on there. Questions, anything you have to say. I try and look at the comments as much as possible in these videos, but because of the frequency that I put them out, I don't always see every comment. So if you have any questions, head over onto Instagram, DM me there. I will try my best to answer your questions and anything you need. I really hope you guys enjoyed this series and you feel more confident in yourself as an artist. And if you don't, you'll get there. Just have fun. That is the number one. That is my New Year's resolution, is just to bring back the fun in painting, because you can get quite in your head of not being good enough as so-and-so, or, you know, all that artist stuff that goes on in your head. Just have fun. Have fun. And if you're not having fun, take a break, walk away, come back another time, and try and have fun again. So that's it for today. That's it for this week. I will be back soon with some more tutorials, but I am going to go recover because I'm still recovering from COVID, and I'm going to spend some time with my family, and that's about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the series, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.